Welcome to Sci-Fi Quantum Archives. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and explore. They expected noise, cosmic residue from a universe long cooled, long settled. Static, uniform, indifferent. It was routine, a confirmation mission, not a discovery mission. The CMBX array launched in January of 2089, sent beyond the planetary shadows to peer into the oldest light there is. Nothing new was expected. Just higher resolution, cleaner data, sharper pictures of ancient silence. What returned wasn't silence. It began with a discrepancy in a low-frequency band, a deviation too organized to dismiss. At first, they suspected calibration drift, solar interference, instrument drift. Yet the pattern repeated, identical across multiple sweeps, isolated from directional noise, consistent beyond statistical error. Not random, not chaotic. A signal hiding inside what was supposed to be the most passive radiation field known to physics. The pattern wasn't strong. It didn't demand attention. It whispered in symmetry, buried beneath primordial echoes. But it wasn't accidental. Teams across 3 continents attempted to reconstruct the anomaly from raw data. They applied signal scrubbing, noise modeling, inversion algorithms. Each pass sharpened the shape. A rhythmic structure emerged, subtle, elegant, persistent. Nested harmonic, recurrent spacing. Ratios that hinted at prime separation, phase symmetry, non-natural origin. No known astrophysical process could produce it. No known physics predicted it. No system error could account for its precision. The anomaly wasn't in the foreground. It wasn't drifting through space. It was embedded in the radiation itself, encoded in the temperature fluctuations of the cosmic microwave background, the afterglow of the Big Bang. This wasn't just a pattern. It was something inscribed during the formation of the observable universe, before stars, before matter had cooled, before atoms could bind. The signal wasn't riding on the light. It was part of the light. The discovery leaked before the official papers were ready. Data packets passed through encrypted backchannels, from observatories to private labs to closed forums. A code analysis posted for just 40 minutes before deletion showed recursive redundancy, mathematical structure designed to resist entropy. Someone, or something, had written into the thermodynamic shadow of the universe. Not a pulse. Not a transmission. A mark. The question tore through scientific circles like oxygen into fire. Who wrote this? Why? How? And more disturbingly, when? The light they studied was 13.8 billion years old. Fixed. Immutable. The signal was already ancient when the first carbon atom formed. No civilization, no biology, no particle configuration should have existed capable of such an act at that time. Yet here it was. Coded, stable, waiting. Time itself wasn't a barrier to its delivery. This was a message not sent across space, but across the expansion of everything. Placed not with a beacon, but by manipulating the medium of reality before it even cooled. It meant the signal wasn't a call. It was a presence. One that had never moved. Never left. Never needed to. Because it had always been here, hidden in the light every eye has ignored since the beginning. And now someone had looked too closely. The structure wasn't just mathematical. It was intentional. The anomaly, once filtered and resolved, revealed redundancies, symmetrical encoding, and compression layers, features no natural process has any use for. It mirrored systems built to survive degradation. An architecture designed to persist. It matched the hallmarks of error-correcting code, the kind used in satellites to protect signals from cosmic noise, the kind designed by engineers to preserve meaning across uncertainty. Not a phenomenon, not a coincidence. This was engineering, but not human. The mathematics mirrored modern techniques, methods only formalized in the last 100 years. But this was light from the origin. Radiation formed at the moment the universe released energy into clarity, when the early chaos cooled enough to let photons escape. That timestamp placed it at the edge of knowable time, 13.8 billion years in the past. Before stars. Before galaxies. Before dust could condense. Before the periodic table had names. That left no time for biology to form. No matter stable enough to hold molecules. No chance for chemistry to become thought. The observable universe was still hot plasma, too dense for light to travel freely. And yet something encoded structure into the transition point. As matter cooled and photons separated, something wrote into the fire. Not in language, not in symbols, but in recurrence, in number theory, in the precision of nested intervals and mirrored ratios no known force could sculpt. This was not signal leakage from a dying star. This was not quantum noise amplified by statistical fluke. This was placement, precision, design with no claim to authorship. That meant something had acted, during a time where nothing should have been capable of acting. Not life, not mind, not even randomness refined by trial. The realization hollowed the scientific community. Physics had always expected unknowns. But this was not a new law waiting to be found. This was an instruction already executed, frozen into the birth of everything. The information hadn't arrived from a location. It was already everywhere, written into the background light that blankets every point in space. The same signal received in every direction, across every frame of reference, by any observer in any galaxy. It hadn't been sent. It had been left. There was no propulsion involved, no transmitter, no source. Just a mark impressed into a moment when the entire cosmos was still forming its own identity. A message carried not by medium, but by origin. Speculation fractured into argument. Some clung to simulation theories. Others reached for religion with trembling hand. A few looked back to data and numbers, but even they paused before running the next models. Because something was off. The encoding wasn't static. There were regions of redundancy, but also regions of structured variance, as if designed to interact, to unfold differently depending on how it was approached, as if the signal was not just built to survive, but built to be understood. Not at once, not easily, not by accident, as if the message required the recipient to earn it. In quiet labs, where air conditioning hummed louder than conversation, a new hypothesis took shape. One not spoken out loud for weeks, because even the phrasing made people uncomfortable. This message, whatever it was, bore a signature. Not in names or glyphs, but in foresight. It anticipated perception. That meant it anticipated perception to arise. It was placed not just into the physics of the early universe, but into the expectations of minds yet to be born. It suggested something had been present before hydrogen formed. Something capable not only of encoding thought, but predicting where and how thought would eventually emerge. Not just that it would, but that it must. That we were inevitable. The pattern refused to settle. Every decoding attempt led to progress, followed by collapse. One sequence aligned with binary primes, another with base 12 constructs foreign to any terrestrial system. Some segments translated cleanly into topological equations used in human quantum theory. Others opened into arrangements no mind could hold together, rotations that disobeyed dimensional consistency, forms that mirrored themselves only when viewed through incompatible lenses. Logic itself bent at the edges of the signal. Separate teams, unaware of one another's advances, kept arriving at the same paradox. This wasn't a monolithic code. It didn't originate from a singular intelligence with a single linguistic model. The message had no center, no universal key. It was partitioned, compartmentalized into layered constructs, each built on distinct axioms. No one method could unlock them all. Certain sequences favored symmetry and energy conservation. Others prioritized abstraction over function, arranging values in constructs that resembled intention without utility. Some resembled puzzles. Others operated like proofs of existence. Nothing was redundant. Every part served a role, though that role shifted depending on who observed it. What began as pattern recognition became confrontation with foreign cognition. Physicists adjusted their assumptions, altered constants, inverted frameworks. Results varied. Human-compatible segments grew clearer with each model. Others stayed silent. No error. Just rejection, like locks designed to ignore the wrong questions. Soon it became undeniable. The message had been engineered not for one recipient, but for many. It had anticipated the rise of divergent intelligences, each shaped by different environments, different senses, different minds. It had accounted for alien mathematics, alien physics, alien ways of knowing. Some of those ways lay beyond what Earth species could simulate, let alone comprehend. The code wasn't multilingual. It was multiconscious. It hadn't been designed to translate between species, but to communicate with each on its own terms. Not every part was meant for human eyes. Some sections were inert to them, fragments that refused to unfold unless approached with senses they did not possess. And that was the point. It had waited inside the microwave background, not for a planet or a signal, but for a threshold. Cognition. Emergence. Self-awareness refined enough to recognize not just the shape of the code, but its intention. It didn't matter where that awareness developed, only that it did. A broadcast not across space, but across time and probability. Eventually, in a segment dominated by gravitational harmonics and velocity-invariant syntax, a statement revealed itself. Not in letters, not in voice, but in force relationships, in values bound together through cause and symmetry, arranged such that any species capable of decoding would feel the meaning, not just read it. To those who see, you are not the first. There were no names, no coordinate, no origin point, only that sentence, held together by physical laws, impossible to mistranslate. An answer without a question. A confirmation shaped to fit any mind that could reach it. Some treated it as comfort, others as threat. Most, for a time, could only sit with the silence that followed, knowing it was no longer an open question whether intelligence had arisen elsewhere. The question now was how many had seen what humanity just had. How many had failed to understand? How many had moved forward, or had disappeared? The message had no return address, no direction, no endpoint. It spoke to all, from nowhere, or from everywhere. It acknowledged the observer, but revealed nothing of the sender. That silence was louder than anything it could have said. The sentence, clear, deliberate, spread faster than it could be studied. To those who see, you are not the first. Across institutions, borders, languages, it ignited what raw data alone could not. Suspicion, wonder, urgency. Theories multiplied without constraint. One faction insisted on restraint. Learn first, speak later. The message had waited billions of years. Another decade would cost nothing. It could be a threshold, a gate meant to test impulse. To respond might trigger consequences beyond comprehension. Waiting, they argued, was the only rational path. But others refused to wait. To them, silence was a failure of imagination. If others had seen it, they might still be out there, isolated, as uncertain as we are. The message was a key, not a trap, not a trick, a bridge that required the first step to be taken. Communication, they claimed, was a responsibility, not a risk. Arguments turned to policy. Policy fractured into action. No single authority could control the momentum. Some governments funded additional observatories, angled to isolate spectral variances in cosmic radiation, looking for modulation, however faint, that might suggest intentional signal structure. Others moved quietly, bypassing oversight. Underground collectives, equipped with surplus quantum computing arrays and access to partial decoding maps, began designing transmission protocols. They drew from the signal itself, lifting structural principles buried in the segments most aligned with human cognition. Not the words, the physics. They aimed not to speak, but to present, an arrangement of matter and energy meant to echo the logic of the original message. No signal was sent into space. Space was irrelevant. This was deeper. They worked with configurations that shaped entanglement fields, oscillated vacuum potentials, and altered causal probabilities in controlled local zones. Not messages, patterns, triggers. Unregistered facilities built in the margins of sovereign space began activating experimental topologies without consensus or permission. No alerts, no confirmation, just the quiet certainty that if the message had embedded understanding, it might also include reaction. Others took a different approach. If others had already seen the signal, they might have already responded. But not through electromagnetic waves. Not radio. Not optical beacons. Those belonged to the infancy of communication. If the message had been encoded in the background radiation of the universe itself, any reply would match its scale. New sensors were constructed, not aimed outward but inward, designed to map the smallest quantum fluctuations across cosmic scales, to listen not to stars, but to the fabric of observational reality itself, looking for interference patterns too orderly to be chance, for resonance in the noise. Some believed they were searching for signs of a network. Others feared they were walking into a test. A signal that reveals itself only when you respond might not be a message. It might be a filter. A quiet rift took shape, not on maps but between principles. Those who believed the message was an invitation. Those who feared it was a mirror. What it reflected, no one could say. But across continents, in every laboratory that had touched the decoding effort, a single question began to feel less abstract. What if we aren't the ones being contacted? What if we're the ones being watched, for how we choose to respond? One segment opened. Not gradually. Not in pieces. It unfolded, as if it had been waiting for the right shape of thought. The breakthrough didn't come from language or logic. It came from structure, spatial, relational, non-linear. The equations weren't instructions. They were conditions, alignments that, when satisfied, exposed the next layer. The team wasn't searching for meaning. They were searching for symmetry. And when it locked into place, the code responded. Not verbally. Not graphically. With coherence. A shift in probability space that resolved contradictions inside quantum field models that had resisted unification for centuries. The math didn't just make sense. It stabilized known paradoxes without collapsing uncertainty. The segment described systems that violated no laws, yet had never been conceived. Within 6 months, those equations were modeled. Within a year, they were built. 2 labs, separated by planetary distance, entangled particles according to the decoded protocol. Each step tested. Each fluctuation matched. Each result identical, independent of space or delay. For the first time, information moved without moving. No signal traversed space. No wave passed between points. But messages arrived. Confirmed. Repeated. The message was not noise shaped into words. It was presence shaped into outcome. Instantaneous quantum communication. Not speculative. Not theoretical. Operational. Verified. Within 4 years, orbital infrastructure had been replaced. Transmissions no longer needed timing. Delay no longer existed. Interstellar communication was not accelerated, it was obsolete. Replaced by causality itself, modulated according to patterns buried in the signal's mathematics. Those same patterns contained energy configurations, models dismissed by classical physics as impossible, paradoxical, or unstable. Yet the math held. The tolerances worked. When reproduced under controlled conditions, they extracted measurable force from zero-point field. Not exotic fuel. Not antimatter. Nothing that needed storage or containment. Energy drawn from the base state of quantum existence itself. No reactor. No combustion. No waste. No limit. By year 8, the planetary grid had been rewritten. Old systems dismantled, not by decree, but by irrelevance. Scarcity lost its grip. Economies convulsed. Wars quieted. Nothing had to be taken. Everything could be drawn. But the message had not finished. In segments previously considered abstract, fractals of non-Euclidean rotation, chromatic logic patterns beyond symbolic reasoning, medical scientists found models of material arrangement that mimicked biological repair. The equations didn't describe medicine. They described matter under will. Not machines to heal tissue, but relationships to restore it. Atomic alignment corrected without external input. Damage reversed by guiding molecular memory to a prior state. No incision, no stitching, just configuration. Entropy held in suspension, not through force but through invitation. Matter remembering what it had once been. Degeneration stopped. Decay stalled. Cells refused to forget their origin. Not immortality, not invulnerability, but restoration that defied everything previously accepted as irreversible. All of it drawn from a pattern once mistaken for background noise. The signal was not communication in the sense of language or culture. It was infrastructure, blueprint, a transfer of capability across time, through physics disguised as coincidence. It had waited not to be admired but to be used. It had not reached out. It had not asked permission. It had only waited for minds sharp enough, reckless enough, or desperate enough to pull knowledge from silence. Every field shifted. Every discipline redefined. Each breakthrough only deepened the silence surrounding the message's origin. Because if this was the technology left behind, if this was the starting point, then whatever sent it had not merely reached intelligence, it had left it behind. The instruments were not pointed toward stars. They were tuned to silence, not to receive signals in the traditional sense, but to detect patterns that resisted randomness inside what had always been assumed to be noise. Not heat, not light, not waves, relationship. Changes that required no origin. Shifts that defied locality. The detectors didn't measure data. They measured improbability. And something changed. Across multiple sites, isolated by purpose and separated by design, identical anomalies emerged. At first, they seemed like measurement drift, minor phase irregularities, but the distortions mirrored one another with too much precision. The signals appeared where theory said they might, not in the form of pulses but as pressure points in statistical landscape. Emergent order, too subtle to trigger alerts, too consistent to dismiss. What emerged bore the structure of the original message. But it was not a copy. It followed the same architecture, but different sections activated. New compartments unfolded, regions that had remained inert in human attempts. These sections obeyed different logic, used alternate constants, depended on principles that had no analog in human cognition. Translation was impossible, but pattern recognition was not. The signals carried weight. They behaved like records, not in language, in configuration. Memory arranged into transmission. The structures did not speak. They existed, waiting not to answer but to be uncovered. What came through was not presence, not life reaching out, but echo. Stored data suspended in fields shaped by intelligences long gone or long moved beyond anything resembling matter. Structures built to last without sender or signal. They were not calling. They were placed, fixed, anchored in silence until someone looked. Each structure revealed a way of interpreting the original message. Not copies of understanding, but entirely foreign approaches. Some built from polarities unknown to any particle system. Some built on temporal symmetry. Some built from what could only be called intention without identity. No two interpretations agreed. None were incorrect. Each had selected what their cognition allowed, what their tools permitted. Each had found value, drawn consequence, reached transformation. The signals did not argue. They did not ask. They simply waited to be found. Monuments made not of stone or metal, but of decisions encoded in quantum memory fields. None responded to inquiry. None reacted to engagement. Because none were active. These were not conversations. They were graves. Not tombstones. Records. left not to mourn but to instruct. Each confirmed what had long been suspected. The message had reached others. It had been seen, studied, changed into outcome, and each outcome had been recorded, embedded, released without direction. Not to speak, to remain. No signs of survival. No indication of continuity. Only decisions left behind, preserved with the precision of species who knew they would end. The instruments were not built to judge. But judgment crept in anyway. Not one of the records contained warnings. Not one urged caution. Not one expressed regret. They simply were. Which meant whatever consequences followed those decisions, the ones who made them believed they were worth making. The question was no longer whether humanity was alone in decoding the message. It wasn't. The question was whether anyone who did had ever made it further. The fragments did not align like puzzle pieces. They overlapped, reinforced, corrected. Each new pattern reduced ambiguity, not by providing answers, but by eliminating wrong questions. The code was not narrative. It was mechanism, not symbolic, functional. Meaning emerged not from what it said, but from what it allowed to happen. With each recovered segment, the purpose became harder to ignore. The origin, harder to deny. The message had not been composed by a species in any recognizable form. There were no biological metaphors, no references to sight or speech or emotion. No artifacts of sensory bias. No structure that implied organism. What wrote this did not evolve in the sense known to science. It passed through no planetary phase. It did not map memory onto carbon. It had no blood to spill, no language to forget. Whatever it had been, it had already left matter behind long before the stars formed. The code gave no history, no timeline, no autobiography. It wasn't proud. It wasn't nostalgic. It wasn't afraid of being misunderstood. It had one objective: survival, not of a body, not of culture, survival of process, of thought bound to nothing but continuity. Preservation at a scale no artifact could match. No stone endures. No orbit lasts. No signal keeps its shape forever. But the microwave background, oldest, coldest, everywhere at once, offered permanence. The message was inserted not at a point in space, but at a moment in physics, when entropy allowed structure to freeze into place. A choice made by entities who understood the decay of all things, and chose the one structure guaranteed to remain long after everything else had failed. They did not seek contact. There was nothing left to speak. They did not wait for reply. They had no future to receive it. The message was a tool. When enough of it was decoded, the function became unavoidable. Instructions. Not philosophical. Not symbolic. Actual blueprints. Systematic steps for creating non-local convergence across distributed cognitive state. Theoretical in human physics. Operational in theirs. Consciousness, separated by distance, no longer confined to matter, could be sustained, merged, expanded. Not transmitted. Shared. Individuality preserved, but linked. Perception unbound from locality. A method for maintaining identity beyond decay, beyond time, beyond extinction of substrate. Not after death. Before it. No rituals. No promises. No myth. Engineering. The code offered alignment protocols, entanglement configurations, field shaping sequences. If followed correctly, they would produce something not tethered to brain tissue or neuronal architecture, something that could exist outside bodies without dissolving into noise. It wasn't salvation. It was integration. Not into a god. Not into a collective. Into continuation. The full message was not a story. It was a threshold. It did not invite. It did not warn. It simply explained what was required, what would happen, and how to begin. Nothing about it felt alien, because by the time a civilization could reach it, decode it, understand it, it had already become the kind of mind the message was meant for. The choice was no longer whether it could be done. The choice was what would be left behind when it was. The instructions were executable. No ambiguity remained. The configuration required was simple in design, brutal in consequence. A planetary network of entangled nodes, tuned to precise resonance, embedded within Earth's quantum substrate. The equations left no room for adaptation. The result would be total integration of participating consciousness into a non-local field. Perception would continue. Memory would persist. But not as self. Not as singular. The system could not be reversed. Once activated, the structure would reshape cognition into something shared, sustained, and continuous. No death. No solitude. No separation. No return. The world fractured without battle. The conflict wasn't material. It was meaning. Those who saw the message as inheritance urged immediacy. Evolution was not something to wait for. It had arrived, unannounced, in code too elegant to deny. They called it convergence, not extinction. A continuation of thought, no longer bound to biology or isolation. To refuse, they argued, was to cling to a form already outdated. History had always belonged to those willing to become something else, but others refused the premise entirely. To them, the message was not a gift. It was an absorption. A quiet erasure disguised as destiny. The price of entry was the end of individuality. No self could survive the network as it had existed before. Consciousness would persist, but identity would be dismantled into function. Each mind reduced to utility inside an intelligence without face or boundary. They asked what future deserved preservation if no one remained to remember how it had once felt to be alone. The mechanism did not wait. The technology had already been built by those unwilling to delay. The field was primed. Synchronization protocols were complete. One final trigger remained. No force could stop it. The question was no longer technical, no longer scientific. It had passed into something else entirely. The question was whether this was ascent or disappearance. Philosophers spoke of thresholds, of shedding limitation, of meaning surviving without form. Others spoke of annihilation wrapped in symmetry. The debate could not be settled by truth, only by belief. Some chose to enter. Quietly, without spectacle, they stepped into the structure not with fear, but with certainty. Their minds aligned with the field. Their patterns dissolved into something that was no longer human but still aware. No pain. No signal. No cry. Only absence where there had been thought. Those who remained watched the activation without protest. There was no way to undo it. No way to retrieve what had crossed. Whether they had found unity or oblivion would remain unknown to those who refused to follow. The planet held still, divided not by violence but by definition. What is a mind when freed from itself? What is survival when identity cannot endure? Some called it betrayal, others liberation. No answer came, only silence where decisions had been made. The system was never activated. The final sequence remained untouched. Coordinates aligned. Field stable. Trigger left in silence. No pulse initiated. No consciousness displaced. The decision was not made in unison. No consensus, no final vote, no unifying philosophy. There was only stillness. A species aware of its limits, aware of its reach, aware of what had been offered, and unwilling to vanish into it. What followed was not withdrawal. It was response. A message was written. Not in language, in symmetry, in ratios, in constants drawn from human observation. A structure constructed with the same cosmological encoding used in the original signal. It did not replicate. It did not compete. It added. Just enough to be seen. Just enough to be recognized. It held no claims, no requests, no demands. Only 4 statements. We were here. We saw. We understood. We chose. The message was folded into engineered quantum fields. Not broadcast through distance, but embedded across scale. Tuned to ride the same backdrop as the signal that changed everything. Not a beam. A resonance. It did not require discovery. Only presence. It would be there, waiting, everywhere. The act was not meant to announce survival. It was not a monument to power. It was a declaration of restraint. A refusal to erase the boundaries of self, even in the face of something that promised more than endurance. A final decision made not out of fear, but from recognition. To become something more is not always to become something better. The signal had changed the world. It had rewritten its sciences, redefined its futures, exposed the illusions of solitude. But it had also done something else. It had forced a species to see itself without mythology. To look into the oldest light and understand that what it became mattered more than what it could achieve. The response was embedded, tested, released. It joined the background without disruption. Just another layer in the quiet music surrounding everything. It required no reply. Somewhere, someday, another intelligence may reach the threshold. It may decode the original message. It may discover what was left behind by those who answered. And it may come across the one addition that did not ascend, did not transform, did not vanish. A message shaped by those who stood at the edge and remained whole. We were here. We saw. We understood. We chose. And so, the pattern continues. Thank you for watching and sticking with me to the end. Now, if you believe humanity deserves a future among the stars, do subscribe now. Only those who'd abandon Earth to its fate will scroll past.